Hi, I'm Vince DelGobbo, and I'm a developer in the Metadata and Execution Services group at SAS. I've been a SAS software user since the early 1980s. I joined SAS in 1992, and working in R&D. Some of the things I do are SAS stored processes, the old SAS Internet product I support, and I work a little bit with integrating third-party metadata with SAS, and also integrating SAS output with Microsoft Office products.
Some of our users like to submit the stored process in a batch or scheduled manner. Can you share what's new in the proc STP?
Sure. Proc STP is new for SAS 9.3 and enhanced in SAS 9.4. In the old days, you could run stored processes kind of, sort of, maybe using either the URL access method in a data step or proc HTTP. There were some limitations with that. You would have to go through the stored process web application, take care of authentication and things like that. In SAS 9.3, we've added something called proc STP, and what that allows you to do is to run a stored process under your metadata identity in a batched fashion. So you would take a .sas file, put the proc STP statements in there, specify any input parameters, output parameters, data, etc., and then you can schedule that up to run in an automated fashion.
What would be the difference from, let's say, being on an AMO client or an EG and running the same stored process versus the proc STP?
Right. I think on the AMO and EG side of things, that was a more manual process, so you would have to fire up one of the Office applications or Enterprise Guide and then access the stored process, manually click your way through. I guess you could potentially schedule that in Enterprise Guide, but I'm not sure. I think we're going to need proc STP in order to do some kind of, if you wanted to schedule an Enterprise Guide project. But basically, I think what I'm saying is that in Enterprise Guide and AMO, you are limited to manual processes where it takes your interaction, whereas proc STP would allow you to batch up and execute on a scheduled basis.
And how does it handle all the parameters? If you have, let's say, 3 or 4 parameters, would you pass it? How would you pass that to STP?
So part of the syntax of the STP procedure, there's an input param statement, and the input param statement allows you to specify one or more input parameters. So, for example, if you needed to specify a starting date and an ending date for a report, you would specify the input param statement and then start date equals, or whatever the name of the parameter, let's just say it was called start date equals the name, the value for the starting date, space, end date equals, so on and so forth, and whatever other input parameters you might have. Just specify them right in the input param statement, and you're off and running.
Well, that's great. What other batch tools can you use to affect the metadata server? For example, the proc metadata. Would that be something that a user can?
Yeah, proc metadata. You can use that to modify SAS metadata, and of course, because it's a SAS procedure, that can be automated as well. I think one of the potential downsides of proc metadata is you have to construct an XML query, and typically that XML query is rather complex, kind of an error-prone operation, so you need to use a lot of caution when you're constructing that query. And also, it's a new thing for a lot of traditional SAS users, XML is, so I would say yes, but good thing to know, good thing to use, but exhibit some kind of caution with that, because you could construct a bad query and something unexpected might happen.
There's a lot of nice functions too that you can call to do some of the updates to the metadata. Do you recommend using the SAS function or the proc metadata?
So there are also metadata functions that you can do certain things to metadata objects. So those are used within a data step, and they're documented in their behaviors. Again, they're a little bit, I don't know that they're any harder to use than constructing a proc metadata query. You do have to kind of know the metadata structure, but then again, if you're going to construct the proc metadata XML, you need to know the XML structure as well. But if you do know the XML structure, what objects you want to touch, then you could use the SAS functions, the metadata functions, to touch those objects, and that is definitely a safer approach because a couple of things. One, you're not constructing XML. Right? Anything that's going to happen is going to happen through a traditional SAS function interface. So it's supported. If the metadata were to change between releases, right, your proc metadata code would have to change to keep up with the metadata. That's another downside of using proc metadata. Whereas that would all be taken care of and abstracted and hidden in these functions. They would just handle the correct behavior without you having to worry, oh my goodness, did the metadata change? Do I need to do something different? The function should work from release to release. So that is probably a safer way if you can find the functions to do all the things you want to do.
Some of the challenges we're having with our team is we're growing from, say, 40 users to 80 users next year, and we're going to hit some performance issues. Do you recommend on the server to set up additional maybe application servers, or maybe look into grid computing? What are your suggestions there?
Oh boy, that's a real tough one without knowing exactly where the bottlenecks are.
Yeah.
I think if they're stored process users, I think one of the things you can do is set up more application servers. Right, that's always a possibility.
Is there load balancing that comes with it?
Yes, there's load balancing that comes with that. That's where I was going to go with that as well. And then you can go in there, and we have this costing algorithm where you can tweak the parameters. And I think we have a couple of good SAS notes on that to give you some guidance on how to adjust those parameters to get better throughput.
Do those reside on multiple physical boxes, or can they have virtual machines on the same machine?
I think either way.
Okay.
Hard to tell what's in my mind. I'm not a hardware guy. I don't know which is going to work best, but I think it stands to reason if you put 45 virtual machines on one box.
It's the same difference.
Yeah.
One of our other challenges is more for our clinical data. We have lots of live names, for example. Each clinical study has their series, and then we have hundreds of these studies. Do setting up these multiple application servers help separate those live names on one metadata server?
I think off the top of my head, I think I'd say probably use the same auto exec.
Okay.
So you just put the live names in one place.
Yeah.
Use the same auto exec. And there's also something new for, I believe it's 9.4. That you might be interested in. We hadn't talked about this earlier, but metadata bound libraries. So one of the complaints we get, and this may be interesting in the clinical side of things, one of the complaints we get is, well, we define libraries in metadata, we put security on them, and then somebody comes along in Enterprise Guide and does an end run around it and issues their own live name.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So there's something called metadata bound libraries, and that closes that hole.
Okay.
So that's new for 9.4, and what ends up happening is you issue this metadata bound library statement, and SAS will go out and touch the header of all the SAS data sets in that location and mark them as metadata bound. So when somebody tries to do the end run with that live name statement, it'll tell them that their access is denied if they don't have the right permission.
If you give the user the option to define their own live name in the EG SAS stored process versus predefining those live names, from a performance, which one do you recommend?
My gut is going to say either put it in. Well, I think metadata might be a little bit slower, or just a traditional live name. If you just need a traditional live name, then just in a traditional SAS auto exec, that would be scoped across the server. The reason being is if I have a stored process that has a live name in it, and many people, and have many users, every time that stored process executes, the live name is going to be issued. And what's the point of that if it only needs to be issued once the server starts?
We try to also increase the performance through use of memory versus disk, and we're looking into SAS file as one of the options to have all the data sets loaded into memory. Are you familiar with that and what that can do?
So would that be, it's been ages since I looked at that. There's SAS file and then there's the laser server. I think it's two different things. So I've not used the SAS file in a while, but the laser server is, I think, where we're positioning things to go to do put things in memory,
Is that
and then using visual analytics on top of that.
is that some additional SAS options and syntax that you have to do, or is it layered in a way that you can use your legacy code to run?
I think it's additional, and there's a gentleman right around the corner here who you can go visit, and he can tell you all about that. He's the expert on it.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot.
You're welcome.